A lone cowboy won a pregnant bride in a poker game, unaware she'd change his life forever. Jack Carmichael hunched over his last glass of rye as the storm outside tore at the walls of Murphy's saloon, lightning slicing through the murky air like a jagged blade. Each clap of thunder rattled the windows, and water dripped from the sagging roof onto the scarred wooden floor. He traced the edge of the tarnished silver pocket watch in his palm, the only thing he had left of his father, and breathed out a cloud of tobacco smoke. His eyes, hollowed by years of loss, flicked to the poker table where three men leaned forward, waiting. Brett Hollis, the portly cattle baron whose gold teeth gleamed in the flickering lamplight. Pike, the jittery merchant with fingers that shook at every breath. And Garrett Mills, a pale stranger in fine clothes whose glare felt as cold as fresh ice. As the piano player's last note died, Mills grinned. He produced a folded parchment, its edges worn, and laid it on the greasy table with slow deliberation. The lamp flames danced over the official seals stamped in crimson wax. A hush fell over the saloon. Even Jack's jittery competitors seemed to forget their cards. Outside, a soft lullaby drifted on the wind, a woman's voice carrying through the storm, and Jack's heart clenched at the reminder of something more precious than any pot of coins. He turned to face Mills, gripping his cards with steady resolve. Three queens peered back at him from the well-worn backing. Brett cleared his throat. "Your move, Carmichael," he said, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his nerves. Jack pushed $50 into the center of the table, stacked his remaining bills, then placed the silver watch beside them. Its soft thud struck him like a coffin lid closing. The saloon's patrons drew a collective breath. "I call," Jack said, voice low. "And I raise you this." Mills's pale eyes flicked from Jack's face to the queens and back again, a silent calculation passing over his features. Then he nodded, leaning back in his chair. With a cruel twist of his lips, he reached into his coat and unfolded the marriage certificate, revealing the name Sarah Mitchell and the words that branded her property, collateral for debt. The hush deepened. Brett coughed, Pike gasped, and the piano player paused mid-reach for his instrument. Outside, the wind roared as if nature itself condemned the wager. Jack's jaw tightened. His mind raced with questions. Who was this Sarah? Why had her voice haunted his thoughts? But he did not flinch. He laid his cards face up. The three queens gleamed triumphantly under the lamp's glow. Brett and Pike folded, scattering their worthless hands. Mills stared at the queens a long moment, then slowly flipped his own cards, a lesser pair that could not rival Jack's. He rose, chair scraping across the floor like claws on slate. With a voice as cold as January wind, he pushed the certificate across. "She's yours, but heed this warning. Sell her quickly, or she'll break you." Jack pocketed the parchment, his grip firm. The storm's fury seemed to echo the recklessness of his choice. He had won more than a hand of cards. He had gambled his fate with a life. As lightning split the sky and the saloon plunged into darkness for a heartbeat, Jack realized that the greatest gamble was only beginning. Jack stepped from the saloon's warm glare into sheets of rain, so heavy it blurred every edge of the world. His boots squelched through muddy ruts as he followed the faint echo of a lullaby carried on the wind. Sarah Mitchell's song, soft and trembling, yet somehow guiding him through the storm. The marriage certificate in his breast pocket felt impossibly heavy, as though it bound more than just names on paper. He came upon the boarding house's flickering lantern, its crooked beam revealing peeling paint and warped boards. Each knock sent a tremor through the thin walls. Footsteps approached, slow, cautious, as if Sarah feared the very ground she stood on. Jack raised his lantern to meet her eyes, saw in them a mix of dread and defiance that mirrored his own. "I'm Jack Carmichael," he said, voice steady against the thunder. "I've come to take you somewhere safe." She studied his rain-soaked coat, glanced down at the certificate barely concealed by his hand. Lightning illuminated her face, fierce, determined, yet edged with exhaustion. "Safe?" she echoed, arms crossing over her belly. "Wasn't safe to begin with." "I know," Jack replied, stepping forward so the lantern light fell between them. "I won you in a bet. I'll not claim you as prize. There's land north of here, honest soil, fresh spring water. No debts follow us there. Sarah's gaze drifted to the swirling storm beyond the door. A harsh world, but merciful enough to let them speak. She weighed his words against the parchment in his hand. Jack watched rain drip from her lashes. Then with a single nod, she turned and opened the door wider. Their journey was measured in stuttering hoofbeats and the blinding flash of lightning. Jack wrapped a canvas cloak around her shoulders, offered his saddle as refuge. She climbed aboard the old buckboard he'd secured, and together they set toward the rising ridge where dawn struggled to break. By the time they arrived, storm clouds had peeled back to reveal aspen groves shimmering gold in the pale light. Jack guided the wagon down a rutted trail, bringing it to a halt before a modest log cabin, its smoke-blackened chimney still releasing wisps of warmth into the cool air. He helped Sarah off, steadying her as her boots sank into damp grass. "What is this place?" she asked, breath catching at the wide valley spread before them. "My home," he said simply. "Few walls, plenty of sky. It'll hold you safe." She pressed a hand to her stomach, the baby's first home in the world. Jack led her inside. A single window framed the gray dawn. A stone hearth stood ready for firewood. Sarah closed the door against the last of the storm, as though sealing out the debts she'd escaped. She placed the lantern on a rough-hewn table and removed a small leather pouch from her skirt, coins saved in desperation. Jack shook his head. "Keep them," he said. "You've earned better than gold." Sarah looked up, vulnerability softening her features. "Why help me?" He met her gaze, honest as the land around them. "Because some gambles are worth risking everything." She offered a faint, weary smile. Outside, a lone rider appeared on the ridge, quiet, distant, watching. Jack caught her stare. "Still dangers," he said, voice low. She lifted her chin. "I'll face them, with you." Jack placed a steady hand on her shoulder as they stood by the hearth, the promise of sanctuary warming the cabin's shadows. Together they would meet whatever came next. ChatGPT Janoi. Jack awoke before dawn to the rhythmic creak of the cabin floorboards and the soft glow of embers in the hearth. Sarah lay beside him, curled beneath a patchwork blanket, the baby's gentle stirring echoing in the room's stillness. Outside, mist clung to the aspen grove, and the valley breathed in hushed anticipation of a new day. He stepped onto the porch, coffee tin in hand, and inhaled brisk mountain air. His gaze drifted across dew-damp grass to the fence line where the herd had grazed. All seemed peaceful, too peaceful, and a prickle of unease crawled along his spine. Suddenly, hoofbeats shattered the quiet. Jack's rifle appeared in his hands before he even registered the sound. 3 riders emerged from the fog, Victor Kane at their head, his coat tailored and his posture as unforgiving as the debts he collected. 2 men in tow carried Winchester rifles and watched with hawk-like vigilance. Kane dismounted smoothly, his spurs glinting in the dim light. He approached the cabin with that same smug confidence Jack had seen in Mill's eyes. Between them lay a chasm of debts inherited and owed. Debts Kane refused to forgive. "Morning, Mrs. Carmichael," Kane called, voice rich as spoiled whiskey. He nodded at Jack. "Your husband, I presume. I trust the wager was satisfactory." Sarah emerged, clutching the baby. Her eyes flamed with maternal ferocity. Kane's gaze flicked to the child, calculating its worth. "Kane, your late father's tab, $4,700 plus interest. Payments due by sundown. If not, your collateral moves on." Jack squared his shoulders. He stepped in front of Sarah, the rifle steady in his grip. "Jack, this family's not livestock. You'll ride off now, or you'll find out how wrong you are." Kane laughed, a low, predatory sound. "Kane, you'd spill blood over a scrap of earth? You think the law's on your side?" He nodded to his men, who tightened their hold on rifles. The valley seemed to hold its breath. Above them, ravens circled on thermals, witnesses to an ancient code of survival and rights. Sarah's voice trembled, but rang clear. "Sarah, we've done nothing but build a life. We'll pay with labor, with goodwill, anything but surrender." Kane's smile sharpened. "Kane, debts aren't paid in kindness. They're paid in currency or in property. He turned to remount, expecting compliance. But at that moment, a distant echo of hoofbeats rolled over the ridge. Jack's neighbor, Tom Larson, appeared atop his horse, rifle slung across his back. Bill Simmons followed, and soon half a dozen mounted ranchers emerged from the morning mist, their silhouettes carved into the pale sky like avenging spirits. Kane froze, glancing between Jack's steady gaze and the line of loyal neighbors closing ranks. Kane, cold fury. This is private business. You'll all regret this. Tom Larson nudged his horse forward. Tom, our valley's private business is looking out for our own. Bill Simmons dismounted and strode up beside Jack. Bill, you got 3 days to collect your debt. After that, you'll have the whole valley to contend with. Kane spat into the mud and mounted, his men following. His parting words drifted back on the wind. Kane, you haven't seen the last of me. I'll be back, with law or worse. As Kane's riders vanished into the mist, the early sun broke free, gilding the valley in defiant light. Jack lowered his rifle, heart hammering, and turned to Sarah, who stood trembling yet unbowed, baby safe at her breast. Jack, softly, they won't come alone next time. Sarah met his eyes with unwavering resolve. Sarah, then we'll be ready. Behind them, the ranchers formed a silent circle, a promise of solidarity echoing through the aspen leaves. Above, the ravens scattered, and the valley exhaled its own vow, freedom defended at any cost. ChatGPT John Noy. Jack crouched in the half-light of dawn, tending the patch of corn and squash Sarah had insisted on planting just beyond the barn. The earth was still damp from last night's rain, and each handful of soil pressed between his fingers felt like reclaiming a small piece of freedom. Around him, the valley yawned awake. Cattle lowed in the distance. A creek burbled over moss-covered stones, and the aspen leaves whispered their approval on a breeze that carried faint scents of pine and wild sage. Sarah emerged from the cabin doorway, cradling the baby against her chest. Her bonnet was tied tightly beneath her chin, and a slender shaft of light caught the edges of her dark hair. She moved with a grace that belied long months of fear and hardship. Morning, Jack greeted, rising to meet her. He offered her a tin cup of coffee, its bitter warmth cutting through the cool air. Sarah took a sip, eyes drifting across the newly mended fence. I never thought I'd see green growing again, she said, voice soft but steady. Thank you for everything. He brushed a lock of hair behind her ear. We're building more than a crop. We're building a life. She nodded, then noticed a lone rider approaching along the rutted trail. The figure rode hard, spurs clinking, dust swirling in his wake, even amid the damp ground. Jack's hand dropped to his rifle, tension coiling in his shoulders. The rider drew closer, a lean man in travel-worn clothes, carrying a satchel at his side. His hat was set low, eyes scanning the cabin. As he passed beneath the porch, he lifted his head and nodded at Jack. Matthew Reed, the rider called, pulling rein. I was sent to find Mrs. Carmichael. Sarah's heart stuttered. Matthew, the school teacher from Santa Fe, the father of her child, and the only man who'd ever loved her for herself, stood before her, exhaustion and relief etched on his face. Jack stepped aside, rifle lowered but ready. Morning, he said. Matthew dropped from the saddle and approached Sarah. The baby stirred in her arms. Matthew's features softened. Sarah, he said, voice thick with emotion, I received word that your father, he passed away. He left his estate to you. I've come to bring the news and help. Sarah's breath caught. She'd buried grief beneath the day-to-day struggle, but the telegram's words cut deeper than any blade. She looked at Jack, his sturdy frame, his honest gaze, and then at Matthew, whose gentle eyes reflected years of unspoken longing. Jackson's rifle seemed to dissolve in his hands. He stepped back, allowing the two to speak. Matthew reached into his satchel and unfolded a crumpled telegram. Sarah read the terse lines. Father died. Estate to you. I'm coming. Matthew, her hand trembled as she folded the paper. I'm here now, Matthew said. You don't have to face anything alone. Sarah's eyes flicked to Jack, who watched her with guarded patience. The morning light glinted off the metal of his rifle and the soft silver of her father's locket resting on her chest. Thank you, she whispered. But I'm not sure what I want. Matthew swallowed hard. I love you, Sarah. I always have. I want to take you home to Santa Fe, to give our child a name, a future. Sarah closed her eyes, memories flooding back. Their quiet lessons under the mesquite tree, his warm laugh echoing in an empty classroom, his promise to protect her. But then she remembered the storm-beaten cabin, Jack's steadfast resolve, the way the ranchers had rallied at her side. She looked at Jack. No demands, only unwavering support. Her voice broke. She turned to Jack. I chose you when I had no other choice. But since then, you've given me a choice every day. Jack's gaze softened. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. Matthew's hope flickered, then dimmed. He nodded slowly. I understand. Sarah swallowed and squared her shoulders. She stepped toward Jack, placing the telegram in his hand. This land is where I belong, she said, voice firm. With you. Behind them, the baby nestled against Sarah's heart, stirring as though in agreement. The lone rider, Matthew, exhaled a bitter acceptance, then mounted and rode away, dust rising behind him. Jack wrapped an arm around Sarah, pulling her close. Overhead, ravens wheeled against a sky now brushed with pale gold. The valley stirred to life, its promise of sanctuary and solidarity renewed. As Matthew's figure vanished down the trail, Sarah realized that freedom was not found in escape, but in choosing where and with whom one truly belongs. Jack awoke to a world turned white. The storm had raged through the night, burying the ranch under 3 feet of snow. Icicles dripped from the cabin eaves like frozen tears, and the aspen grove stood silent, branches bowed by frost. Inside, Sarah lay pale and tremulous on the narrow bed, her nightdress damp with sweat. Each contraction clutched at her with merciless intensity. Jack knelt beside her, hands cold but steady. He glanced at the lowest shelf of the hearth, where Mrs. Henderson's satchel lay unopened. No time to fetch her. He rubbed Sarah's forehead, voice low and urgent. Jack, keep breathing. I'm right here. Her eyes fluttered open, fear and resolve mingling in their depths. Sarah. He's coming. He understood. Both the baby and their enemies were on their way. A distant rumble of horses drifted through the wind's howl. Jack rose, yanked open the door just as Victor Kane and the sheriff's posse burst through swirling drifts. Rifles leveled. Kane's cruel grin cracked beneath his heavy mustache. Kane Dawn's here, Carmichael. Time to pay, one way or another. The sheriff, badge glinting, advanced. Sheriff court order says we seize Mrs. Carmichael and her child. Jack planted himself between them and the cabin threshold. Jack, you see this woman and this child? They're not collateral. You'll go through me first. Sarah gasped as another contraction seized her. Her hand gripped Jack's sleeve. He thought, she's stronger than any contract. Suddenly, the cabin door burst open behind him. Mrs. Henderson stood framed in the warm lamplight, coat dusted in snow. In one motion, she swept in, blankets, hot water, and a look that dared death itself. Mrs. Henderson, move aside, she needs room to breathe. Fast. Jack backed, heart hammering, as Kane's posse hesitated. Outside, a solitary rider emerged through the gray haze. Matthew Reed holding a leather folder. He rode directly to the sheriff, holding the papers aloft. Matthew, wait. New ruling. Supreme Court decree issued last month. Contracts involving human collateral are null and void. The sheriff squinted at the embossed seal. Kane's grin faltered. Sheriff, after a long pause. Where did you, Matthew? I petitioned the court on her behalf. It's your duty. Withdraw immediately. Snow blew into their faces like white fire. Kane glared at Jack, then glared at the sheriff. With a snarl, he gestured to his men. Kane, this isn't over, Carmichael. I'll be back, with paperwork or worse. They retreated, spurred horses churning the drifts. Inside, the tension snapped. Sarah cried out, and Mrs. Henderson lifted her skirts, perched on a low stool. Jack knelt by Sarah's side, whispering encouragement as the storm's fury roared beyond the cabin walls. Mrs. Henderson, one more push. Sarah summoned every ounce of strength, gripping Jack's hand until her knuckles whitened. The cabin filled with the primal sound of life. A wail shattered the cold hush. Mrs. Henderson gently placed a bundled baby in Sarah's arms. Infant breath steamed in the frosty air, tiny fists curling. Sarah wept, cradling the child to her chest. Jack hovered, tears freezing on his cheeks. Sarah, voice thick. He's perfect. Jack bent to kiss her forehead, then the baby's, marveling at the new life amid the storm's wreckage. Jack welcomed to the world, Miguel Robert Carmichael. Outside, the storm began to ease. Drifts glinted under a pale sun, and ravens returned to circle overhead. Jack gathered Sarah and their son in a blanket, stepping to the door with Matthew at his side. The valley lay silent, blankets of white concealing old wounds. For the first time, Jack felt the future was theirs to claim, to build and protect. Sarah, warmed by new motherhood, looked to him with fierce pride. "Sarah, we did it," Jack nodded, gaze drifting to the horizon where the sun pierced clouds like a promise. Jack V.O. Freedom isn't won at the draw of a gun or the turn of a card. It's fought for in every breath, every stand you take, and every hand you hold through the storm. They stepped into the golden light, family bound by choice and courage, ready for whatever came next.